So two DuPont reinventions. About 25 years ago, Chad Holliday, CEO of DuPont in Delaware, US, announced a second reinvention, a third S-curve for the company. The first one was a move from explosives to chemistry, a natural change because explosives were dynamite was based on cellulose chemistry. And that first one was one of the great business stories of the 20th century. The second was what we were embarking on, to move from chemistry into biology and broader science in general. The second one didn't fully make it despite many good things. I'm going to tell that story today. I lived through it, and actually, after Aiden invited me here, I figured this was the best place to tell the story for the first time. E.I. DuPont was escaping the revolution in France, Eleuthère DuPont, and he came to the US and found out nobody knew how to make gunpowder at scale. So he had a connection with Lavoisier, the great chemist in France, and set up a firm in Delaware, about 50 kilometers from Philadelphia. And for 100 years, they were a wonderful explosives company, but they got bloated and they got lethargic, and they were going to sell out to their nearest competitor in early 1900s. Three cousins, great-grandchildren of the founder, decided to buy the company out and turned it immediately around. They created a powder trust monopoly, legal at the time, and shored up the explosives business in a big way. They got very aggressive about fundamental research. They got very aggressive about chemistry research. They did acquisitions, and the result was 60 or 70 years of a host of legendary products, some of which are shown here and that many of you will know. Little known, Pierre DuPont, the most important of the three cousins, took a ownership position or a managing position of GM in 1920. And you heard Aiden talking about the transitions from Ford when Ford forgot to migrate to the next level. GM took over, and DuPont was a huge part of that transition of making GM the largest car company in the US. About 70 years later, the gas shortage revealed that DuPont had become mature and bloated, like many US companies. And then we went several decades kind of trying to find ourselves, bought Conoco Oil Company to vertically integrate, got serious about sustainability as a concept. Then Chad Holliday came in as we were approaching our 200th birthday, very old for a US company, and decided we're going to reinvent. Bought Pioneer Seed Company for $10 billion to move further into biology, which had already been started. So when I think about these two reinventions, I think about them in terms of five dimensions. 5 dimensions that would influence probability of success. Is there fertile ground? New technology, how do you get it? Leadership and culture. Headroom, and what I mean by headroom is margin for error. Things are going to go wrong. There's going to be difficulties. You have to have a cushion. And design and methods, which would include how do you plan, how do you organize, how do you strategize. We wouldn't be here talking if they weren't really good the first time around in all of these categories. But in the second, we had trouble. There was fertile ground. I think we all know biology is a wonderful space to be working in today, and it was a natural transition out of chemistry. But the others, we had difficulty. Let me start with the last one, design and methods. In the first reinvention, they created their own methods. They created their own designs. Pierre DuPont was kind of a rock star CEO back in the 20s and 30s. And he did so well at creating planning methods, at creating research, fundamental research methods, at creating organizational structures and ROI analysis, that these became industry standards, as captured in a famous book by Alfred Chandler on the creation of the modern corporation. The second time around, most of these ideas, most of the philosophy came from the outside. In particular, Jack Welch. It seems not that long ago that he was running the business dialogue, and we don't really think about him all that much today, but he ran GE up to a $650 billion market cap around 2000, and he was the only person you heard about at the time. But he was a little bit of a bubble. He had an overfunded pension plan. He did a huge amount of acquisitions that kind of disguised the fundamentals of what he was building. He did this during one of the great bull markets of the 20th century. And of course, a large portion of his money came from money lending, which really didn't teach that much about a product and technology company. And it's kind of ironic that DuPont and many other companies were looking towards him as the leader right when it was about to crash. But it wasn't just Jack Welch alone that we had in this second reinvention of information from the outside. We had consultants bring in ideas from other companies and from the consulting firms, with Jack Welch kind of as a spiritual leader of the whole thing. The idea was, if we do all of these programs, coupled with our technical innovation and acquisition, we would reinvent the company for a second time. Some of these programs had marketing, internal marketing and branding and logos. And after a while, I started to think of it as TLA management, three-letter acronym management. Okay, some were 2, some were 4. So Toyota Production System became DPS, DuPont Production System. And Oliver White became DIBM, DuPont Integrated Business Management. I was in a meeting presenting to the executive team once, and I was pointing out how so many of our methods were leading to silo behavior. And someone raised their hand and said, "Oh, for that you need E to E." As if it was some kind of recipe that you would put 2 parts of this TLA and 3 parts of that TLA, and it was supposed to add up to something deep. After a while, I think there became to be a bit of an unreality about these programs, because the leaders of them would add up how much revenue and cost savings that we got from the programs, and the aggregate number would be greater than the amount of money we made as a company. Okay, what's my point? It's not that most of these programs were great, with a few exceptions. Toyota Production System revolutionized manufacturing after Ford had done it 70 years earlier. Six Sigma, in its pure, original, disciplined form, is a wonderfully creative process. What I'm saying is that you don't drag and drop a bunch of programs that other people took years or decades to develop, to learn, and to internalize, and think that that's going to reinvent your company. I fear some of our acquisitions had a little bit of that drag and drop flavor too. Whereas in the first reinvention, the acquisitions were very synergistic and filling in places needed. Whereas in the second time, sometimes it was a block that we would just bring, and now we're in that business. Wouldn't we have been better off with fundamentals? Wouldn't we have been better off with deeper critical thinking on fewer programs? And by the way, we had additional internal programs, some good, like pricing and others for various subparts of the business. But wouldn't we have been better off learning the essentials of these methods rather than having consultants bring in literally thousands of PowerPoint slides? That was the basis for these programs. Wouldn't it have been better if we had fought out what we really believed about them, because there wasn't a lot of alignment in these, and then we come up against another dimension that made the reinvention difficult, and that is it was a relationship culture. And there was very little direct fight it out until we come to a common place in the meeting room. It tended to be behind closed doors. It tended to be in the hallway. And there was not alignment in all these programs. And there was backbiting around who's getting the money and who should get the mind space of the company. We would have been better off with those fights, I believe. And it reminds me of my old piano teacher, Vladimir Havsky. Born in Russia, grew up in Shanghai, ended up in New York City, where I met him many, many years later when I was young. And I played this Brahms intermezzo for him. And I thought I did pretty good. Didn't make a lot of mistakes. And I said, I guess I've got that one. And he said, how can you say that you've got a piece until you've got it inside of you? He said, how can you say you got a piece until you've memorized it? I was still using the music. He said, why do you think they say learn it by heart? And I just don't think we were learning any of this by heart and getting it inside of us. And despite all of the consultants we had, one thing we certainly didn't have was a strategy process that we could learn by heart and that would bring the company together. We had all the usual suspects of strategy, but they led mostly to lists. Lists of sub-goals, lists of directives, lists of initiatives. There was very little trade-offs involved. Again, there was very little fighting it out about what was the right thing to do. And very little of all the things we've heard so far today around experimenting, around learning. From an early time in the company, I would sit in meetings or read strategy documents that would have all these words in them, sometimes on the same page. And I started developing what ended up becoming the 5 disqualifiers of strategy. Because you could know that these words and the sentences that they were part of weren't strategy, even without even knowing what business you were talking about. And in fact, often, if you took the name of the business off the sheet, you wouldn't know what business it was. The disqualifiers are a very disciplined way to immediately reveal problems with strategy statements, and they include the famous opposite test that has been used by others. But as time went on, I knew I needed to go deeper than this and try to find a strategy methodology that was more in tune with my understanding, my intuition about innovation, including my experience in music, where I had grown up in a musical family and studied composition. I wanted to create something that actually very in tune with everything we heard this morning about creating a minimum viable strategy matrix with alternatives and fitness criteria and scenarios all inherent, and then working it, suffering with it over time, debating it, beating it up, living with it, as Nadia just talked about, over time until it kind of reveals its secrets. I wanted it to look like this, instead of these nice, clean, stepwise, sequential processes that we know generally go to the electronic shelf and collect electronic dust. Another image of it was a puzzle. it's like creating a puzzle. Well, you'll never have all the pieces. Some pieces don't fit. Someone comes along and changes some of it halfway through. And the worst part, and Aidan and I always talked a lot about this, there's no picture on the box top to tell you what you're aiming at. That has to emerge over time. So how can we get a system of strategy that captures these issues, that allows for experimentation over time, that allows for pilots, allows for research? These are all the elements of an emergent strategy approach, and they all play a role in what was just described, including on the bottom right there. How long does your strategy last? There's no number. Your strategy lasts as long as it's still in tune with your diagnosis, when it's still in tune reality. That might be 10 months, that might be 10 days if you discover something. The heart and soul of it is this one circled here, called an influence diagram. And what this is a very simple but profound model of a complex adaptive system. What it is aspiration on the right-hand side, and that aspiration can be anything. It scales. For example, that aspiration could be a reinvention or a transformation. It could be as simple as solving a problem. Pick it in IT. If you work backwards from that aspiration and think about all the influences that could possibly lead to achieving that aspiration, you go from a very high level on the right down eventually to things that you are free to do, to actually choose and do. So that the influence diagram, in essence, connects the outcome level, or in complex adaptive theory language, the global level, the high level, to the action and decision level, or the local level, or the low level. And when you analyze this simple model, you come to a very quick conclusion. Okay, maybe not so quick, took a little time. Is that on the right-hand side, the achievement of your aspiration, or what you believe your aspiration is at any particular time, is what matters. But what matters is the least actionable, because the only place you can take action is on the left-hand side. What you can do. You can make choices, you can take action. What's the difficulty with this is you cannot, quote, do an aspiration. You can't directly do what you want to achieve. You can't directly do a reinvention. What you can do is have a theory, a hypothesis, a model, a strategy framework on the left-hand side to choose how to take action, such that the probability of achieving your aspiration is up. What's typical? It's really easy to granularize your aspiration into all kinds of parts. This is where we get the lists. Okay, manufacturing, your part. R&D, your part. This business, your part. That business, your part. And what do you end up doing? You get a long lists of how each group or segment or system that you divide up into what their goals are to make the whole right. And inevitably, this is a great way to create silo behavior in an organization, because you never talk about the trade-offs between these various groups. Instead, strategy is a central rule, a central philosophy. And we talked so much about, the idea of a rule has come in and out in the discussion all day so far. How do the crows create their flocks? By 3 simple rules. A strategy in this model is a central rule, a central principle, a central guideline that's part of an overall strategy framework that includes plans and metrics and tactics and a diagnosis. But this rule makes the choices and action coherent as you walk down the road and learn your world. And another thing that's very different here is that you don't derive a strategy from the aspiration directly. It can't be done. You derive it from what's in the way of achieving the aspiration. And this has a remarkable focusing effect, because unless you change the system constraint, the limiting factor in a system, you can't change the system. Some of you have heard about this in TOC, but here it's much broader than the typical theory of constraints approach. It can be assets and technical barriers, but it can be emotional barriers. It can be cultural barriers. It can be complexity. This model brings a different way of thinking about execution. Not a trivial definition of execution where you say, well, let's get good results, or seize opportunities when you see them, or hit your milestones. If that's all execution meant, we wouldn't need a term for it. How about execution as we have the discipline to stay with the hypothesis that we've created until we know it's wrong, and then we change it. This is a universal concept. It applies in music just the same. You cannot do a great piece, however you define a great piece. All you can do is write bloody notes. And composers have internal rules. They have internal philosophies that guide them to make one note right and another note wrong. And they have strategies, in essence. And they also have to know what's in the way. This model comes with many requirements and many outcomes, which I won't go into detail here, except to say that there's rigorous terminology and models and rigorous low-level design principles. And we've got to agree that rigor is not the enemy of creativity. Rigor is the essence of creativity, but it's got to be at the right level. It's got to be at the low local level. And it's the rigorous nature of an emergent method that actually is going to enable AI to help creating strategy in a whole nother way, because you can train AI on these low-level design principles. Not a design principle like, how do you write a good goal, or how do you write a good strategy? Design principles like, what are the properties of the right fitness criteria in a strategy matrix? Or what are the parameters for designing a scenario? It turns out we had a chance to have a corporate strategy that could have brought all the diverse SBUs together under one common theme. In the kickoff of the second reinvention in January of '99, where this slide that Chad Holliday used, everybody got a copy of this book. Adrian Slowatsky, Value Migration. His point was he could have been in the sessions today. No value chain, no business model lasts. And that the key to staying with the value of a value chain is knowledge intensity. Get paid for what you know, and obviously migrate your knowledge to stay with that. And Rita McGrath was a big part of this whole thought process back at that time. We would have had to take this philosophy and make it specific for every SBU. We would have had to ask, okay, in your situation, how are we moving away from an asset mentality and how many tons can we get out the door every day to one of where is the real bottleneck in the value chain? What are we controlling? What knowledge do we bring? But we didn't really do it for a lot of reasons. And we ended up with very few unifying rules besides core values, which were always strong. We ended up with, we have a strategy if only people would execute. One thing that really held us back was a lack of headroom. We sold Conoco 2 years before the kickoff of the reinvention occurred, and we sold it at like $37 a barrel. Who knew it was going to go to $200 a barrel in the next 7, 8 years? This would have paid for a lot. Contrast it with the first reinvention. Teddy Roosevelt was not happy with all the monopolies, including DuPont. They busted up DuPont's explosive business into 3 companies, but DuPont had the ability, you make your own luck sometimes, to say, hey, you should only buy from one company for the military, and that should be us. The government agreed. Who knew that the Great War to end all wars would start in 4 or 5 years and give DuPont riches that enabled them to invest for research and for acquisition that no one could have ever predicted. After our kickoff of our reinvention, the dot-com bubble burst, big trouble for us, 9/11, a very highly promoted displays venture fell flat, and OLED display materials, and so on. We didn't get rid of commodity fibers soon enough. We had environmental issues, still do, of course, hanging over our heads, yet we still made big promises that we didn't really keep. So what's the end of the story? Ellen Kuhlman came in as CEO in 2009. She did put a lot of energy into the company. She continued to reduce costs, eliminating headcount. But it's funny, the story of DuPont since 1970 is no matter how many people you let go, there always seem to be too many. She did a hard drive on liberating working capital. She jettisoned a few businesses, some good, some bad. She bought Dynisco, the Danish food ingredient and other biology company. But despite all these efforts, she did keep the same philosophy of what we were going to do, and the leadership stayed pretty much the same with some exceptions. Eventually, a lack, I think especially of organic growth and new organic technology development, coupled with kind of lackluster stock price, enabled activist investors to finally get involved and connect with the board, which for my entire career there was just a sleepy board who, from what I could tell, never said anything. Nelson Peltz of Trion got involved, and after a struggle over something like 9 months, Ed Breen, lately of Tyco, came in and started breaking up the company. A breakup is complicated and still continues to this day. So if I recap the way I thought about these reinventions, yes, we had fertile ground, but we were more dependent on acquisition, it seems, than organic development. We had challenges in leadership where we just weren't fighting it out the way we had to publicly and make that part of the culture. Headroom was very low. We couldn't absorb problems. And you have to pay for your reinvention, and you have to have, and I think this came out in the earlier discussions, you have to have a long enough time to let things develop and emerge. And if you're fighting quarterly numbers ridiculously, continually, it makes it tough to do. And not inventing our own methods, not getting it in our hearts where we really understood what we were creating around a reinvented company. If I sum it up, I would say that the second reinvention, we tried to do reinvention directly in some ways. And in the first, I don't know that they even thought about a concept like reinvention or transformation, but they did the fundamentals so deeply and with such discipline and energy that a reinvention emerged. Thank you.